Well, welcome to this webinar. This is, I think, our third in our series of K-12 webinars. And just to get it out there, the next one of these, if you like these, is August 15th, 2023. And it's about deconstructing specific aims. So we'll be diving into how to develop specific aims and probably also get into how to make them better based on critiques and so forth. So that'll be the next topic on August 15th. Tonight, our topic is laboratory project mentoring and time management skills. And we have two great speakers. I think actually the first is Dr. Strahle, who's here at Washington University and is the associate professor of neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, and pediatrics. She's the director of our pediatric cerebrovascular program and our fetal myelomeningocele program. And she is R01 funded laboratory. In fact, at WashU, I'm pretty sure we're the quickest neurosurgeon to R01 funding that we've ever had, and is doing great work. Her work focuses in on germinal matrix hemorrhage-induced hydrocephalus and how that leads to neurocognitive deficits, looking at the molecular pathways by which that happens and trying to find novel therapies to reduce hydrocephalus in that manner. And has more recently broadened her research interests into CSF flow and neuronal interactions, which are very exciting. So thanks, Dr. Strahle, for being with us. And I'll go ahead and just introduce the other speaker, but I know we're starting with Dr. Strahle first. But the other speaker is Dr. Chiocca, who is the Harvey Cushing Professor of Neurosurgery and the Chair of Neurosurgery at Brigham. He is the co-director of the Institute for Neurosciences at Brigham, and surgical director for surgical director for Center of Neuro-Oncology. And his laboratory interests have to do with genetic therapies for malignant brain tumors, and a major focus on oncolytic viruses as a approach to treating high-grade gliomas. So welcome, Nina, welcome, Jen, and I look forward to this webinar. And I think we're going to start with Jen.
All right. Thank you for that kind introduction, Greg. I will share my screen. Hold on one second. Sorry. All right. Is that in presentation mode? Look good on your end? Okay, great. So yes, I'll be talking today a little bit about time management skills as they pertain to laboratory project and mentoring. This is definitely an iterative process, and I do not have all the answers. I think it's constantly changing, and I keep coming up with different, hacks or strategies. So just a brief introduction, and then I'm looking forward to the small group sessions where we can really, talk about things more specifically and specific examples. Briefly, just to give you a background on my path, I trained at the University of Minnesota. I did residency at University of Michigan. While I'm interested in research and have a lab, I did not do a PhD. I did spend 2 full years in the lab as a postdoc as a resident, which I think was helpful in providing a background there. And then I came to WashU as a pediatric neurosurgery fellow, and then I've stayed on as faculty. As Greg mentioned, I didn't mention this part, but I am a former K-12 awardee, and the K-12 program is great for those of you that have not taken advantage of all of the seminars that we have this year. There's an in-person retreat every year that's really great to just meet people in person and connect. So I highly recommend it, even if you're not applying for that year. If you're able to get to that retreat, I would highly recommend it. So I applied for the K-12 and then set up a lab, applied for some foundation grants, ultimately ended up getting an R01, which was super helpful in just jumpstarting everything. And then, as Greg mentioned, I broadened the scope of some of the stuff we're doing in the lab, and it's a lot of fun. So the surgeon scientist model is a bit complex, as many of you may know. I know we have both medical students, residents, and junior faculty. So for those of you that aren't in the junior faculty role, when you do get there, there are different models. So in other disciplines, there's this 80-20 model where you have 80%, research time, 20% clinical. Some even have 90% clinical, 90% research, 10% clinical. There aren't a lot of us. So a lot of neurosurgeons that are doing research, or at least NIH funded research. This number's from a couple of years ago. It might be a little bit different. But there's about 80 folks, and about 8 women in the country doing research. Many of the families now, whether if you do have partners, there are a lot more 2-career families. So you're balancing your time with that of your partner or spouse. Unlike the clinical work, the science never stops. It's sort of always ongoing. And I think when you're thinking about getting, picking a job wherever you go, I think you really do need at least 50% clinical, 50% research as the minimum starting out. I think it's hard to really, if you want to do serious research, it's hard to do that when you're have a majority clinical load. There's just not enough time. And also just with the structure of Zoom has really helped. Like, it really has been transformative for me, specifically just in terms of being able to get where I need to be and be able to be present at a lot of, department conferences and meetings. But the model is early morning, late conferences, and which makes it hard to set aside time for grant writing or, some of the other things, and making, balancing everything. So this is a slide from a couple of years ago, actually. So the 1-year-old in this picture was almost 5, but this was an example. I didn't know this picture was taken, and I was putting together a similar talk a few years ago, and I found this in my phone, and my husband and I are working. He was in business school at the time. I was working, I'm sure, on a grant, and, we have a crying child, and then the other child has a phone and is taking pictures, and it just sort of, the life is just sort of a little bit chaotic. I have just 2 slides left here. So this was one where, I don't really have all the answers for time management, but I have tried different strategies. So this is just working any and all hours I can on nights and weekends. And this was my child. You can listen to it here. Hopefully it's not too loud. They would play, she said, I'm working on my grant. So they would play grant writing. So you could tell what they were doing. So to summarize sort of time management. So for the lab, these are just a few bullet points of things that I've learned, and I will continue to learn, and I'm constantly seeking tips. For instance, I met with a radiologist she just has a lot of different research projects going on, and she's written a code in her email to filter out all emails that have an unsubscribe somewhere in the text. They go to a separate folder that she then checks every so often. So I'm constantly learning new hacks. So I haven't done an email hack like that, but I'm definitely in need of a different email strategy. So for the lab, I think for me, having dedicated time for grant and paper writing, it's hard for me. I know there's others, and I think Greg is actually one of them, where I think does better with, maybe 30-minute blocks, or at least it may not be Greg, but a few of my other colleagues that are really good at turning on and off sort of clinical work with grant or paperwork. I'm not one of those individuals. I need more of like a 2 to 4 hour block if I'm going to be working in a paper or grant. So I have to sort of engineer my time such that I can try to get those blocks if I can. And a lot of times it just comes up on the weekends. In the lab, so dedicated time, being more effective for that. Delegate, really relying on folks in my lab to do some of the work that I used to do a lot of, in terms of, scheduling of various things for experiments. I've gone back and forth depending on where we are with the lab progress, in terms of having group meetings versus individual meetings, to try to, if I don't think that's going to be a effective use of time for all of us to meet, I'll do individual meetings, or vice versa. From a project standpoint, I used to wait a while to check in, because I didn't want to, I don't know if I had a student or resident working, I thought I would give them enough time. And then I realized that too much time would go by, and then we were having to sort of rehash everything. So it was almost like just additional time of things we had already talked about. I sort of balance not checking in too frequently, but also checking in frequently enough that we're not having to rehash everything, and we can actually move forward in a project. So, and avoid long delays between those touch points. From a mentoring standpoint, I think if I spent a half hour with every single student that emailed me, all I would do was mentor. And this has been hard more recently, trying to strategize. So I've done more 15-minute meetings. If I have an upcoming panel session that I'm doing, I'll refer some students to the panel session. I've tried in office hours. didn't really work out that well. And then some students that are interested in shadowing and meeting, I will direct them to my assistant that will help coordinate them for shadowing, and then we'll meet during that shadowing day. But I've definitely had to be strategic about trying to figure out how to, meet with everyone and make it work. And then the weekends are what I end up doing a lot is just on the weekends, giving folks a phone call, talking then if we're unable to, schedule a half-hour block during the week. And then applicable to all the above, email's been it's a struggle. We get so many emails a day and staying on top of them. And I used to file all my emails. So now I'm working towards doing a little bit less filing of the emails and batching them into bigger folders. And then I am planning on writing a script for my email to take out all the unsubscribe emails, which would be great too. And then duration of meetings. I think we used to have either a default hour block meeting, but there's just not enough time, I think, in the day to really have that as a default. So I would try to work on tailoring the time of meetings, and even being okay with, I'm having a 10-minute meeting or a 15-minute meeting, because not every single meeting has to be minimum 30 minutes. So those are just a few thoughts, and I don't want to take up too much time. So.
Thanks, Jen. That was great. Really appreciate it.
And this is my cell phone, email, and Twitter handle if you guys need.
Okay.
You want to screenshot that. All right.
You want to, Nino, you want to do your presentation, then we can open up to your questions.
So,
Yeah.
Sachi, I think Jennifer did an amazing job, and I'll let her do the slides. I'm just going to say a few words without slides, because I really think having an interactive meeting with questions, answers, and small groups is probably more important than me lecturing. I think time management is key, and I don't think anybody knows it. There's not a formula. Nobody knows exactly how to time manage. I think you do what works best for you, and sometimes this also changes with aging, with your age and where you are in your career. I think Jennifer said it correctly. She said 50-50, 80-20, but in reality, when she talked to you, it sounded like she's working all the time. So I almost say it's always 100-100. When people ask me, how much time do you spend to research, how much time do you spend in your clinics, I say I spend 100% of my time in research, 100% of my time in the clinics, 100% of my time in the administration, because we all really work long hours compared to everybody else. We don't work a 40-hour work week. We don't even work a 50-hour work week. Jennifer showed you nights, weekends, evenings, holidays, and that's the way I grew up as well. So this is, but I love it. And I think ultimately, if you love what you're doing, time management just comes to you. And I think that is the key. If you have the passion for it, if you love it, then time just flies by. I think that in terms of your lab, the most important thing about time management I figured out is really planning ahead, especially as you're putting together projects, as you're putting together the people that are going to help you with those projects, collaborators. I think early on, it's yourself, maybe your tech, your postdoc, and as you grow older, it's collaborators and postdocs. Who's best at doing what? You can waste a lot of time having the wrong person doing the wrong experiment. You really have to think through the team. Who do you have? If you put, I started dwelling into the area of immunology about 8 years ago. I didn't know much about immunology, but I found collaborators that know about it, and then started hiring postdocs that did immunology PhDs, and I put those people onto those projects. But if I'd put somebody that had never done immunology, I don't know immunology, put a postdoc that doesn't do immunology, that would have been an incredible waste of resources and time. So really have to couple the expertise with the projects that you're going to have, and that's really going to save you time. Plan way ahead for your grants. Don't let, sometimes there's a tendency of doing things at the last minute. I personally now, I still write out my R1s. I still write my own grants. I don't have somebody else write them. I usually do them 6 months at a time and then put them away, reread them. I have an R1 that I'm about to send out, and I actually wrote it 5 months ago. all the experiments were there 5 months ago. That way you don't feel rushed. You don't feel like you've got to do things at the last minute. And that's when usually mistakes happen. In terms of mentoring, I think Jennifer said it right. Especially as you're seen as this MD researcher, neurosurgeon, you'll get a lot of students and people wanting to be mentored by you, emailing you, sometimes people from other countries. You just don't have the time. You don't have the time to do it well. So really, try to perhaps mentor people that are closest to what you're doing, what you can do, and try not to overextend yourself, because you're not going to do a really good job. And sometimes I always feel that the best mentoring is role model mentoring. You lead your life as a research scientist, neurosurgeon, and do it well. And just that model sometimes can help. So, and then there's always the issue of how do you do all this and do other things in your life? And I think that is key. You need to have a great family. I was lucky because I've always had a great family, and they kind of understood, well, that's what dad does, and we understand that, and we're okay with that. But I think that is something that you really have to deal with in terms of how do you meld your family life or other activities that you do with this all-encompassing time commitment that you have in your clinical work and your research work. So I'll stop it at that and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Nino. Thanks, Jen, again. You want to open it up for, we're going to do questions first and then small groups, or were you envisioning this? Just open up to questions, right?
Yeah, I think we can open it up to questions and
okay.
Yeah, go through them.
Okay.
And it's great to see. I've seen some medical students and some fellows that were in our residents that came across our place. So it's great to see you all.
Any questions from the group?
I have a question. This is Brandon at University of Florida. During my MD PhD training, my mentor was a MD PhD neurosurgeon. I work with Brian Ho now as well. A model that I've seen work pretty well is partnering with a PhD scientist to help run the lab. My question is, in finding that partner, how do you go about that starting out as a junior faculty member, and what's some of the decision tree you made in trying to establish correct partners?
You want to take that, Jen, or I can take it?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an early career standpoint, I think it's hard to have that in terms of funding. I'm 8 years out, and I am looking towards trying to potentially find that model, but it still requires funding. So figuring out, I think the funding is the big part of it. I think in theory, it seems great. I think so. There's some complexities, because I think there's PhD scientists that are going to want to, really have their own research agenda, and then finding someone that might be able to partner a little bit more specifically. So I'm not aware of any way to do that, like out of the gates. I don't know, Dr. Chiocca, if you have.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. Actually, I had a slide that I made in the past when I talk about the different ways in which one can start off their lab. And so one of the ways might be exactly what you said, Brandon. Now you have to be lucky enough or fortunate enough to find the PhD scientist that wants to partner with you. I think with the onset, or right now with the fact that clinical material and clinical specimens and clinical stories have become so integral and so important to the advancement of science that also becomes almost easier. I think that there are a lot of, let's say, if you study, for example, brain tumor immunology, there'd be a lot of PhD immunologists that would love to partner with you as a neurosurgeon, because they can get specimens, blood from patients to work on their project. And it's always easy to do if it's somebody at the same level as you. If it's somebody that's more senior, that's going to be an issue. If it's somebody that's too junior, there may be an issue. But there may be, but there are ways in which, the PhD scientist does not really want to go to the meetings you go to, and you don't want to go sometimes the meetings they want to go to. And there's always a way to figure out how to divvy up the papers. So I think that that's a great model. You have to be lucky enough to find the right person. There has to be some clear lines of demarcation in terms of expertise. It cannot be seen as a one-way street, or that one person always benefits and the other doesn't benefit. But that is definitely one way. I mean, the other ways that people have done this has been to hire within. You have postdocs that have become special, that become really good at something, and then you try to keep them around as junior faculty in your group. Sometimes you have to pay for it, but if you're a busy clinician, that may be possible. Or ultimately you develop your expertise yourself, but that's become much more difficult. But I've liked the partnership ideas.
Well, thank you.
If it's okay, I might add one.
Yeah.
I agree. I would just add that I think, in my opinion, the first couple of years is a hard time to do that, to have that kind of person. I agree with Jen that I think you got to get the lab established. You got to, do a lot of things on your, yourself and get things going in the right direction. And then I think as the funding comes in, you get a little bit more experience, your lab it grows, then that might be the time to consider that kind of person. And then when you are doing it, I do think you want to be I think it needs to be, there are different models of it, but I think you want to be very open and transparent about what the model is that you're looking for or how this relationship would work. So that could be someone who's going to be your right-hand person and your vision is that they would be a scientist in your lab that helps you run their lab and, would help with grants and things, but you're going to be the one driving the science. You're going to be the one driving the grants, and they are going to be kind of in some ways, a very senior and important, but secondary, or a right-hand person to help run things. That's one model. Another model might be, someone who's, younger and hungry and wants an opportunity to initially do that type of support service, but over time is going to be given resources and time to develop their own independent ideas, and they could grow into their own PI. So there's different kind of models, but if you're not clear at the beginning of what you're thinking and what they're thinking, that could be an issue over time. I'm speaking from experience on that. There are other questions from the group? Oh, maybe one more question, then we'll do small groups. Is that okay? Anybody else have another question?